Well, hey there, and welcome to another episode of My Counselor Live. My name is Matthew Thrower, and I'm honored to be on the team here at MyCounselor.Online and also the host of today's episode. I want to introduce you to our featured guest and also one of our MyCounselor.Online therapists, Carrie McCormick. So Carrie, can you tell us a little bit about yourself to all of our viewers and listeners out there?
So I'm Carrie, and I have been with MCO for over a year now. I've super enjoyed it, love what I do. I live outside of Nashville, Tennessee, and so have been here for quite a while. And I am a mom and a wife. I have two little girls who that's my other job when I'm not doing therapy that I love as well. So
Two full-time jobs. I totally
very much
understand.
so. Exactly.
Good deal. Well, thank you so much. Let's get into the article that you wrote. You recently wrote an article that I probably could have used last year.
Yeah.
And everybody could use right now. It's called Anxiety, Depression, and What You Need to Know About Doom Scrolling.
Yes.
Coming off of 2020, like we could really use this. Amen. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So tell us, Carrie, what inspired you to write this article?
Well, to be transparent, I kind of feel like we kind of share this load just as humans. I mean, being inundated with constant bad news, I found myself just holding a lot of bad news, more than I really wanted to, but also feeling like with everything that's happening in the world with coronavirus and all the cultural things, like it's just like this, bad storm that you can't look away from, and so I somehow, felt like this would just be very relevant to our time. And when I wrote this article, I felt like, we were kind of coming off of the the big peaks of coronavirus, and now, things have kind of started to ramp up again. And so it just felt like, a very timely thing to address. So.
Yeah, indeed, it does need to be addressed. I mean, I've always been to the idea that bad news sells.
Yeah.
I mean, if you watch the news, do you ever hear good news?
Yeah,
that's crazy.
We don't want to hear good news, unfortunately.
Yeah, so it's because that bad news, it sells. Other than myself, who is this article written for?
Yeah, I feel like it's written for all of us, and unless you kind of live off the grid, and unless you have really good boundaries to be able to block a lot of this inundation, from coming at you. Otherwise, it's everywhere you turn, and everywhere in culture. You don't have to turn on a news station, but you can even just, turn on your football game or your, anything, your social media, and it's just always there. So
yeah.
Yeah.
The news is always breaking. It's on your phone. You're right. It is everywhere. You mentioned some things that I thought were pretty interesting. And again, like I said, I could have used this last year. Everybody could. Now we can really use it again. But you mentioned some things that there are actually effects of this doom scrolling when you're constantly being inundated with just awful news. You mentioned health effects to it. I mean, it affects your stress levels. It's just so many things. Talk to us and tell us, like, what are some of the effects, and maybe it'll kind of encourage us to take the shift away from just constantly being in bad news.
Yeah. Well, yeah, like you said, there's mental, emotional effects, and then there's physical effects. I think when we are in this constant loop of just reading this bad news, and it's one thing on top of the other, and it's not even our own hometown, but it's across the country or across the world. we can tend to see the world as just completely unsafe and negative, and we can get this sense of feeling unsafe in the world, constantly kind of wear these glasses that just the world is just a terrible place to be, which is not necessarily true. There's a lot of good in the world and good things that happen. But with that can just produce this loop of anxiety, and then depression can follow that, and anxiety being the sense of like, I need to know what's going to happen. I know something is going to happen. I need to be on top of it and be able to kind of get there, or get to it before it gets me in a way. So it's this kind of gnawing sense of needing to kind of be on top of what's happening and to know everything that's happening. And when you're in that loop, then that can trigger these physical effects, when you're seeing all these negative pictures and words just blasting in the face all the time. These stress hormones get released, the adrenaline and cortisol get released, and that over time, if that's a chronic thing that's happening over time, can cause headaches, can cause heart disease, weight gain, high blood pressure, and then just in a sense of just burnout, of just holding too much that you're not meant to hold.
Yeah, so I think I put something together when I read the article. I read something from the news. I was doom scrolling. That last year, the two biggest killers were COVID and suicide. And I kind of put this together, like, how much of just the constant bad news, how much does it really affect us? Affects us greatly. And I think this should be a wake-up call for us. What are we filling our minds with? What are we filling our lives with? I mean, I think I got to a point last year where my wife was like, turn off the news now, because it was, I mean, it was even getting to me, because you can't escape all of the bad news. And I think just that's kind of a wake-up call. If that's all we're doing, we're constantly ingesting in our lives, in our mental, it could be bad. It can be bad, and it's not just the physical aspects it can have; it's the mental aspects that it can have. And I really appreciate you bringing that up. That's really good. So walk us through and help us out of the funk, help us out of the doomsday scrolling. What are some practical steps that we can do to stop?
Sure. Well, I think it's helpful to even understand the addictive nature of it, because when you are doom scrolling, and using the term scrolling, right? Say you're on a device or your phone, or even, now our TVs or digital, you can pull up an app, anything anytime, and just whatever you want. And so I think you have to realize just the nature of doing the scroll, like having that much control over what you see, it can be addictive. And just normalize that and realize, like, come to this place of like, all right, I need to, understand that I can get caught in this behavioral pattern, and then you can do something about it. So I would say, if you find yourself falling into that trap, like, you're going to fall into it, then be intentional to replace the time that you might spend doing that with something else. Go for a walk, turn on music, and do something that's kind of puts your brain into kind of a passive state. So to speak, like walking, I don't know, playing with your kids, or something that just might introduce this sense of just, not having to just be on top of things and be in the know and think.
What about like connections with people?
Yeah, that's another thing. I think, we're doom scrolling because there's a sense of fear and worry, and we feel like the world is negative and terrible. And talking to your neighbor, kind of putting yourself where you are while you're there. Just having conversations with people around you can give you a more kind of clear picture of what the world really is like, where you are. And I think people like to, we see this a lot on, various posts through social media, but people like to kind of go back to the Mr. Rogers thing of, where he used to talk about find the helpers, and something bad is going on. Find the helpers. And so I would say that, even if in your own life, if things are feeling really negative and bad and hard, and that is a reality, in your life, go and find the helpers because they're there.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really good. So somebody's maybe watching this, or they're probably listening on the podcast. They're like, wow, you've just described my current situation. What's maybe a final piece of advice that you would give to that person that's watching, or maybe just read the article?
Yeah. I think I might say I kind of want to go practical and then maybe a little more, big picture existential, but gratitude goes such a long way. And realizing what there is that is good and to be thankful for. And I think as believers, we know that God is on our side and he's given us grace and he sustains us. And so there's a lot of gratitude in that. And I think also a little more bigger picture is that, in this doom scrolling, there's this tendency to think that you can be everywhere. There's this sense of needing to be omnipresent and knowing what's going on around the country, around the world. And that's just, we can't do that. We're not meant for that. That's God. That's who he is, and that's what he does. And just come to reconcile with that. And be dependent and trusting in him that he's got it.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna have to use that in a sermon. That's kind of still that we want to be omnipresent by looking at what's happening in all the world, but that's God's job. That's so good.
Yeah.
And I think the last thing that one of the last things you wrote in kind of puts things back into perspective is the John 16:33. Jesus is about to leave his boys. He tells them, you're going to have trouble.
Yeah.
But what? Take heart. Be encouraged. He's already overcome the world. And I think that for me is where I found where you can just breathe and rest in that, knowing that the world may look like it's going up in flames, but we have God. We can find our joy in that. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. That's our hope in all of this.
It is. Well, thank you so much for sharing the article with us. And I really want to encourage you, if you're listening or watching, check out the article, share it with your friends and family. It will be linked in the show notes below. So I'm going to move on. One of the awesome things about hosting these episodes is talking about trending topics. And I'm a cultural nerd. I love to, I guess a better way to say that, I'm a cultural observer. Maybe it's a nicer way of saying things. And today's topic is burnout. I've seen it, probably write a book about it, but I want to hear from a clinician today. Carrie, talk to us about burnout. What is it?
Well, it's very real.
Yes.
And it's a big deal. It's something we should take seriously. It's a big deal. It has been termed as psychological strain that's just prolonged over time. It has a chronic nature to it. It's like a level of stress and overload that it's chronic. And so burnout results from that.
Yeah. So maybe kind of talk to us a little bit about some of the warning signs. What are the warning signs of burnout?
Yeah. Well, I think that there may be a sense of emotional exhaustion, a sense of depletion, tiredness, fatigue.
Mhm.
I think that's some of the physical things that can be signs, but then there's also this kind of emotional stance of just a lack of empathy,
Mhm.
um, toward any, I guess, your coworkers or your work or any, whatever the scenario is.
Mhm.
A cynicism, just towards life, towards your work, towards others, maybe, and then just a sense of a lack of achievement, like you can never really accomplish
Mm.
and get to the sense of completion and having done something. There's a sense of kind of relief, like there's good feelings that come with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's encouraging for us to talk about this. I mean, for a while, this was probably something we only talked about in the church world, but
Mm,
now I've seen a shift, that this is something that all of the world seems to be talking about now. I'm guessing, I'm no expert. 2020 probably had a little bit to do with that.
mhm.
But how can someone recover from being burnt out, whether you're in ministry or not? Nobody's immune from getting burnt out. And if
Yeah.
that's us, how can we recover from it?
Mhm. Well, I think it's kind of the same thing that I mentioned with doom scrolling.
Yeah.
There's a need to accept the reality of it. Like
Hmm.
this is a thing and it's real, and you need to just know that, and normalize it, accept it, um, and then get really serious about taking care of yourself.
Hmm.
Um, that I guess the physical side of that would be just, of course, like eating well, sleeping, exercising. I mean, there's always a connection between your mental load and kind of your physical well-being,
Hmm.
and so they're always kind of talking to each other. And so you want to take care of your body, and then with the mental piece, um, you got to reduce the stressors. You got to essentially reduce the load
Hmm.
and realize, what am I holding? How many things am I holding? And then what needs to be taken off, or do they all need to be taken off for a time? Like how
Hmm.
burnout out am I? Um, and let go of this sense of perfectionism, of believing that you can just do all things perfectly all the time and really well. Um, just come to this acceptance that that's just not even possible. Um, Delegate things to people. Um, just feel okay with asking for help, because you've already accepted this is a thing, and that you've already determined, hey, I need to take care of myself. So
Hmm.
now I'm gonna really just kind of be okay with asking people to help and do things, and then create boundaries around yourself. What do I need to say no to that um, that will enable me to recover from this? Because if I don't say no, then it's likely I won't be able to recover, and I'll still be
Hmm.
in this chronic situation of burnout.
Yeah, I think all of those are really good, very helpful. I know the practical side of it for me also was just this idea that I've got to I've got to put down this Messiah complex that I think I have, that I've got to be involved in everything, and that I'm probably the only person that can help.
Yeah.
Because that's a dangerous
Mhm.
spot to be in, because that can cause burnout. And I appreciate you saying the boundaries, setting the boundaries, because that's where that comes into play. We're not God, we can't save everybody. That's his job.
Mhm.
Create those boundaries. That's been very helpful.
Mhm.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for
Yeah.
that. Yeah, we're going
Yeah.
to move into our Q&A session.
Mhm.
Everything we've talked about so far, it flows right along with some of these questions
Yeah.
that we're going to ask. And here at My Counselor Online, we love to answer your questions. And I just want to encourage you, it doesn't matter what type of question it is, submit it to us.
Mhm.
I have a couple questions that were already submitted to us that I'm going to ask Carrie. But before I do that, I do want to encourage you. you're watching or if you're listening, submit your questions. You can go to MyCounselor.Online/ask. Again, MyCounselor.Online/ask. And who knows, we'll probably answer your question in a future episode. So let's get into our questions. Carrie, the first question is, how can I cope with anxiety throughout the night that causes me to not be able to turn off my mind and go to sleep? I think we've all been there, right?
Yeah, I know, and I've been there too, and
Yeah.
that's just so hard. There's this feeling that you just can't stop the train. It just keeps wanting to go and go, and so there's a few things. Top thing, top kind of practice that you can do is called mindfulness. And this is just kind of in its simplest definition, is kind of thinking about what you're thinking about. And that helps you get out of that loop in your brain that you kind of get, caught up in and just don't have control over. If you can just step outside of that and take a look inside at what you're thinking about, that can really help slow down. It can begin the process. And there's more things to mindfulness. And I think maybe one other helpful thing to mention about that is kind of just refocusing your thoughts, maybe introducing, as you're thinking about what you're thinking about, choose to put your mind, maybe bring it back to your body, as you're trying to go to sleep, and you're real still and you're laying in bed, you might just, turn your thoughts back to your breathing and back to just feeling, it's a good idea to use your senses just to jump out of that loop. Are there any smells? Sometimes I like using diffusers with the essential oils that can help distract you when you focus on a smell or something that's there. Or like, feel your comforter or your sheets just to slow yourself down, slow your mind down. I think also it could be helpful to, if depending on what your mind is stuck on, you can determine, hey, I'm going to set aside a certain time of day to really think about these, like just put these out there and give them time and thought that with purpose in a sense. Like, is there a solution to this or is there not? Is this anxiety related? Am I trying to take care of things while I'm laying in bed and I can? It's sleep time. It's not take care of things time, If there is fear or anxiety there, it's helpful to be able to know that you can share this with someone, like determine, hey, I'm going to take this to somebody to talk to them about it instead of trying to, resolve this in my own mind every night before I go to bed. And maybe have a routine that you do before bed, just to train your brain to say, this is going to be sleep time, and set yourself up for success, whether that be just turning off the TV or any devices for an hour, reading something, and being intentional with your thoughts and where you want them to go before you go to bed at night. So those are just some ideas, some thoughts that could be helpful.
Yeah, that's very good. I mean, I'm glad you mentioned the routine. I mean, that's something we try to instill in our kids. So why would we stop doing that as an adult?
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
Yeah, that's good. Thank you so much for that. And thank you for asking the question to our listener and viewer. Our next question is, how do I know if I'm experiencing post-wedding depression?
Sure. Well, if I were able to talk with you kind of one-on-one, I might ask some questions, like, what are you experiencing? Do you feel just your mood is down, you feel sadness, you feel some irritation or lack of motivation, or maybe there would be this sense of um, unmet expectations, or a sense of like the reality, like kind of my new reality as a married person, and is different than what I expected. I would just kind of gauge maybe what's going on, what you're thinking about, what you're feeling, to determine where you might think that it is depression, and wonder. Um, and yeah, and even that you would ask the question just sounds like maybe there is something significant enough, or that matters enough, to really just be able to talk about it.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, I think this is a good time to plug what we do here, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's
Yeah.
sometimes the questions, we want to get a little deeper into them. And so I would encourage the viewer to seek out help, right? Go on to MyCounselor.Online.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so thank you so much, Carrie, for answering that. And again, I just want to say thanks to all of our viewers and listening audience for submitting your questions. And thank you again, Carrie, for writing the article, for sharing your insight. Do you have any final thoughts or anything you'd like to share with us before we close out today?
No, I mean, only I just kind of feel the sense of that we're in this together, and we need each other. And so I just hope um, more and more that we can, you know, come together to really, um, you know, feel like we have someone to depend on and feel safe with, and
Mhm.
um, yeah, and not have to feel like we're alone in a lot of these difficult things. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, thanks again, Carrie. I appreciate that. If you have any questions that you would like to ask or that you'd like to submit that maybe can be answered on a future episode, again, just want to encourage you to go to MyCounselor.Online/ask. Also, make sure you stay up to date with all of our latest helpful and encouraging content that is produced from My Counselor Online. You can subscribe to our channel and follow us on all of our social media platforms. We're on Facebook at Love My Counselor. We're on Instagram and also at Love My Counselor. And our YouTube channel is My Counselor Online Christian Counseling. Thank you again so much for watching today or listening, and we'll see you next week for another helpful episode of My Counselor Live.